So we are here, automated accessibility testing in JavaScript frameworks. We got a lot to cover in a very short amount of time. So I want to make sure we're able to get to the end so we have questions along the way. So before we start, I'm just going to go into who is this big dude with a beard and a backwards baseball cap talking to you? It's not Noah, it's Mark. I'm Mark Steadman. I'm a developer consultant at Deque Systems. My team, we work on actually doing developer remediation and helping developers fix accessibility issues. JavaScript framework accessibility, automated testing for accessibility, making developers more aware of some of my accessibility interests. And then in the actual piece here, I have some of my social media account stuff. I will put that at the end as well. But if you're looking for me on LinkedIn, you can just search Mark Steadman. If you're looking for me on Twitter, it's Steady 5063. That's Steady STDAY 5063. So objectives for today. We're going to talk through three big things that I want takeaways from this actual session. One of them, what is the benefit of automated testing, right? Let's explore the benefits of it. What does it give us from an accessibility perspective in JavaScript frameworks, right? Understand the level of tests. This is huge. For JavaScript framework testing, this is enormous in understanding specifically what the actual levels of tests are and why it's important in JavaScript frameworks from an accessibility testing standpoint. And then also we're going to talk about ways to ensure an accessible future. This is basically putting testing in place that is sustainable and making accessible content for the future, right? So those are big objectives for today. But before we start, I have to make this disclaimer because it's 100% true. Always have a manual testing process. Yes, yours truly that's talking right now. I am a massive advocate for automated accessibility testing, whether that's regression testing, automated scans with Axe Core, right? Automated accessibility testing allows us to catch issues easily in our dev processes and less velocity with it, right? Less impact on velocity. But you should always have a manual testing process in place and ready to go. I can't tell you how awesome it can be if development teams can learn how to test from an accessibility perspective, right? Keyboards, screen readers, right? Always know in your mind you have to have a manual testing piece tied to this, okay? So accessibility testing with Axe Core. Axe Core in general is an accessibility test engine for websites and other HTML-based user interfaces. It's fast, lightweight, secure, built seamlessly to integrate into existing testing environments. It can automate accessibility testing along with your regular functional testing. Okay, it contains 90 accessibility checks. It can check up to 50% of accessibility violations. It can help reduce the overall number of manual test cases you need. It can help maintain a baseline accessible framework, and it can be used as a teaching tool for developers. Man, when I get into the demo of this, I want to emphasize that last point. Using this as a teaching tool for developers, that's my goal always whenever I do these sessions, is to make this informative to you who are developers and maybe you who are QA folks who do testing, right? But I want to make this so that when you use this and you use this in your process, you are learning to be accessible developers so that along the way, accessibility is just another step in the process, right? So that's using Axe Core with accessibility testing from an automation perspective. But before we get into why this is all going to be unique, why we're here, why we're talking about accessibility testing in JavaScript frameworks, we have to talk about the levels of test, right? And the first level of test is broken into functional component testing. So we talked about JavaScript frameworks. We're talking about specifically component-based testing, right? React, Angular, Ember, Vue, whatever it is, functional component testing is the baseline for those applications. So each web component you create is tested for functionality and overall purpose. That's functional component testing. The other one is integration testing. Integration testing is each individual web page fully rendered to a browser is tested for functionality and overall purpose. There's end-to-end testing, which kind of plays hand in hand with integration testing. Some people actually call them the same thing, but each web application is tested from the beginning to the end in a crawling-like manner or in a flow-like manner along the way. The last one is critical flow. Critical flow testing is a specific data-driven flow that is critical to web users' test functionality. For this next part, we're going to talk about why it's unique to JavaScript frameworks. We're going to look at it at two levels. That's functional component testing and integration testing, okay, or end-to-end testing, depending on how you want to call it, okay? So the big one, why is JavaScript testing, framework testing different? This is one of the things that I want to hit home before we kind of get into the demo piece. So in order to effectively test for accessibility violations in an automated way, you must hit multiple levels of test. If you cannot hit multiple levels of test, two different things can unfold. Basically, you run the risk of issues reappearing on your site over and over again, or you run the risk of missing issues from an automated perspective if you miss a certain level of test, right? So let me give an example here really quick. A company creates components in Angular for a reusable library, right? Those components are consumed one way or another within different applications or pages or page contents across the site, right? Or within the organization itself, right? The company requires these components be tested for accessibility issues. Awesome, that's a great standard to have. Believe it or not, that's actually pretty standard for a lot of people we have, having baseline accessibility testing along the way. And to not slow down the process, the framework team, along with QA, decided to add automation in to speed up the accessibility testing process, okay? So, rehashing back, I'm an Angular team. I make components that are reused by multiple different teams across the world, right? Or across my organization. And within that, then, I reuse those actual components to be used on different pages, like on my accounts page, home page, right? Those are all reused across the way. So now that I have that, I want to make sure that those components that I deliver to my internal clients are accessible, right? So here's where the mistakes start to happen. So I start testing, okay? Here's a certain scenario for it. I start testing only component and functional testing, and I have it broken down in one certain way. So I always say testing has to have three goals. It has to have an action, it has to have a goal, and it has to have a result, okay? There's three different functionalities that come with it. So if I only do component testing, right, the action is I test my components with AxeScore. Awesome, 1 for 1. My goal is to ensure that all components are accessible to our consumers. Awesome, 2 for 2. The result of this happening, why does QA still see automated issues still when testing, even though we are testing each component individually? That's weird. Well, I'm testing my components. My components themselves have no accessibility issues when I test with AxeScore and go through with it, right? But why, when QA gets this and they get it to a page, are there accessibility issues that come back from it, right? It's mistake number one when it comes to actually testing content. I'm testing one level of test, right? What happens when I put two components on a page? Do I know how those components interact? What if I put two different components on a page? What if I put two the same components on the page, right? How do those interact with each other? I don't know, because component testing is scoped to specifically that component itself. So I don't necessarily know the interaction. This is mistake number one when it comes to JavaScript testing, is we scope it to one specific level of test and we miss a greater picture view of how it's going to be used within a different application, right? Now, let's flip this around. Let's say I don't do component testing. I've actually seen this. So this is going a little bit different than the narrative. I make my content, and what I say is I don't accessibly test it. We accessibly test it on the pages, right? First thing I get back from people that say, when I say, hey, you need two levels of testing, well, let's do the integration testing. It'll work just fine. Okay, awesome. Well, if we do that, right? Again, action, goal, result. So for integration testing, my action, I test my page level content or my end-to-end flow with AxeScore. Awesome. Again, 1 for 1. Goal, to ensure my customer-facing content has no accessibility issues. Awesome. 2 for 2. The result, how do we keep seeing the same issues show up over and over again on our automated scans? You want to know why? Because you're not testing the functionality of the actual content, the components that are going on the page in that process as well. So for instance, I'm a new developer on my team, right? I show up with Noah. Noah's brand new to the team. I'm working with Noah and I say, hey, make this new component, update it for me, right? I don't have accessibility standards in my process. I don't have AxeScore in my process. I don't have anything with it, right? If I don't have a standard it can actually code against, I'm just going to make content, throw it out the door and say, good. Even my updates, if I don't have accessibility testing actually in a clear defined path, guess what? New content is going to go out the door and it's going to be inaccessible when it comes around, right? So these are the two things that we're talking about, right? So component level testing, integration testing, or end-to-end testing in JavaScript frameworks have to coexist and they have to go hand in hand, right? But it's a little difficult to see this in practice the first time, right? So what I want to do is I want to actually jump into an example integration, an example project that I have. Because if I show this to you, it's a little bit more impactful than just being like talking it straight through and saying, yeah, you can do that. But Mark, I'm going to find some flaws in what you say. That's fine. I want to show it to you in practice because this happens more often than not. My job within Deque is actually helping teams set up our paper product, Axe Dev Tools, similar to this. But what I see is this exact same thing over and over and over again. Two scenarios. I test only components. I still see stuff that's on my actual integration testing. I only test integration. I go back to my components, right? I keep seeing new stuff coming out the door, new accessibility issues. So let's get into a working example that'll talk through specifically these issues and how to deal with them from an accessibility standpoint. So if I go into here. This is my application. I'm a Star Wars mega fan for anybody who's on here. So this is a lightsaber emporium where you can buy your lightsabers and do all kinds of cool stuff. This site is purposely made inaccessible, which by the way, I'm going to say this right now. Once you get to learn accessibility, it's extremely hard to make inaccessible content. So in this case here, I have a site, right? And I'm going to do that first scenario. So I'm a team that creates components, right? And those components can be consumed by somebody else on a page. And those components then, when they go through, essentially what we're looking at is when these get put it onto a page, they should be accessible. Awesome. So let's do a scenario. I'm going to use this footer that you see down here as my example, okay? So I've got some link lists down below, a contact us section with an email and a message form, okay? So now when I go back into Visual Studio Code, I'm going to go directly to this actual footer component itself. So let me go to the footer component, okay? For the most part, I use just straight HTML. By the way, public service announcement. This is in React, but guess what? You can use semantic HTML in all your content. So don't ever use the excuse that I can't use semantic HTML in React, Angular, Vue, Ember, because you can, and it works great. So in this case here, I'm using just standard HTML from it. So I'm going to go to my actual component. Yes.
Sorry to cut you off. We're getting a couple of requests in chat. Can you actually zoom in a little bit on the text for the editor you're in right now? Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. No, you're all good. Thank you. I appreciate that. I never know how fake the screen is when we get into Zoom. So awesome. Okay. So I'm going to go to this actual footer spec itself. So I write everything that I do. This one, again, this is a React project. So in this case here, what I'm using is I'm using testing library with React, okay? And I'm going to pull in Axe Core into this project. Axe Core, again, using it as an API is relatively straightforward. So what I'm doing is I'm just importing everything from Axe Core as Axe with Axe Core inside. And then when you pull this into your project, when I set these up, a lot of times from when I set these up actually into projects, what I normally suggest is just adding accessibility as an extra test case into it. So for instance, I have this footer spec.js. What I want to do is actually add to this actual test case. So for instance, I have all my test cases here. Component has loaded, checking to see if it's loaded up. The number of items that are in the list, right? And now what I do is just add in accessibility check. And this allows me to test that same footer component with Axe Core. So essentially all we need to do, this is using React testing library, is render the footer. I'm going to pull the container from it. The container is just the raw HTML that allows us to run against that. And I'm going to run axe.run, the basic run command for Axe Core against the content. I'm going to run it against the container, and then I'm going to get the results back from it, okay? Normally what I suggest is using the results.violations.length. The violations array is the actual one-to-one WCAG violations that come back from it, okay? So in this case here, I would expect the violations.length to be 0, right? I would expect there to be no accessibility violations on this footer specifically, right? And I, right here, in case everybody's wondering, I have a custom reporter that I make. It just makes a log file just for this demonstration purpose. So y'all can kind of see this in a nice, neat format when it comes along. So again, the footer itself, right? When I run these test cases now, what I should expect is to have 0 accessibility violations, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run npm run test, and these are my functional tests only. So when I'm running this now, all my normal React test cases, so I'm using React with Jest, with React testing library are going to run, right? So all these specs, button spec, card item, data input, footer, header, listing, right? Those are all different components that I made. All of these have run, so now I can see the results. So I am going to use the footer again as an example. So if I go to the footer component, okay, I expected there to be no accessibility violations. However, I found 2. Okay, cool. So I'm going to jump to the actual Alley reports that I made from this. Again, teams actually can take this and use this as a console log if you want to. I like to just use this for demonstration purposes, just to make a quick log file so you can see it. So if I go to the footer accessibility issues, I see 2 that come back. So, all right, so I have 2 issues. First one, I expected the HTML found at this selector to have no violations. Form elements must have labels. Oh, it's missing a label. Well, hold on real quick. Let me see. Oh, email, but isn't it there? Oh, it's not associated. Okay, cool. Well, let's go into my actual component, my footer component itself. And we'll come down here and change this to actually match the ID for the actual piece here. So, sorry, large font size. I gotta get me to scroll over a little bit. All right, so I'm going to tie HTML4 because again, a lot of people along the way don't know when you use a for within React, you have to use HTML4. You can't just use for with it. For is a reserved word in React, so you have to use HTML4. So that takes care of the first one. Awesome. So that should take care of that first issue that I saw. The other issue that came back from it, let's see if I go back to my logs really quick. Okay, that's my form control again. UL and OL must directly contain a list item. Oh, what? If I go to my footer, don't I have, oh, yeah. I use an HR in there for a nice little piece. So fantastic. I'm going to get rid of that because I don't want to have an HR in there. That's fine. We can use CSS and go back later and do that. Okay. So that should take care of those two issues. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to rerun my functional test cases. Awesome. Let this run. Okay, cool. We're done running. And now, if I go back, you'll notice footer is now passed. So I passed all my accessibility test cases with the footer itself. Awesome. That's exactly what you want. So I'm a component tester. I'm able to go to it. I can say, hey, I've got all the accessibility issues fixed for this component itself. Fantastic. So when I ship this, I can say, hey, from an automated accessibility standpoint, I have no accessibility issues that exist on it. And this is real-time feedback, right? You're seeing it as I go. So as I create new content, I can actually get results back directly to me and say, hey, this is accessible or it's not. Yes, it is 50% accessibility, right? But if you can get to that manual testing piece on the other end as well, using something like Storybook or even some kind of renderer with React or just running it locally, you can actually get to that full accessibility testing for those components, okay? Now, what I'm going to do for demonstration purposes is I'm going to fix the rest of the issues that exist in here. So I know there's a couple other ones in here. Okay, listing specs. I'm going to go to my listing. This listing is calling out that I have an accessibility violation on the image. I like putting this into this conversation. This is relatively straightforward and easy fix. However, a lot of people who do images in React, they forget to put an alt text in there, or they put an alt of null. One thing you can do in this case, my example I have here, the alt text is described by the text anyways, but a lot of people, what they don't do is they actually don't put in the ability to use props for an alt text to allow developers or anybody who's using that to put the actual alt text in there. One thing to note, just make sure if you do use an image tag directly in a component, you give someone the ability to add alt text. That is one thing that I see over and over and over again is people don't do that, or they put alt of null when it needs alt. In this case, I'm putting alt of null. I realize I'm going counterintuitive what I'm saying, but that's because my content is described. Again, I've got the same scenario here. So I'm going to save. I'm going to rerun my test cases again. So again, I had 3 components that were coming up with accessibility issues. This is now running. So I have 6 specs that are running. Boom, all of them have passed. Fantastic, right? This is great. This is exactly what we want to see from an actual accessibility testing standpoint, right? Great. So now we're back to that scenario again, right? I've tested my components. My components are accessible, right? I push them and I say, yes, we're doing accessibility testing. It's a standard. Fantastic, right? But now we get to integration level testing of it. So what happens when I get to an actual page itself? And the page, right, when I put these components onto a page, what ends up happening, right? Do I actually, am I actually making accessible components, or am I going to find more accessibility issues? The answer is you're going to probably find more accessibility issues. Now, the first thing that people come back and say to me is, yes, Mark, of course, you're going to find more accessibility issues because, yeah, you're basically running against page, you're going to get page level content. That is correct. You will get more page level content when you actually run Xcore against an actual page level integration test. However, most of the issues that you can see are going to actually come from the components you've created because they haven't been combined onto a page itself, right? Cardinal sin that I see over and over again is just testing different flows in isolation. Components and integration, they have to coexist together in order for them to be fully accessible. So let me bring back up my site really quick. So this lightsaber emporium, right? We're going to test against this, right? And I'm going to show you a specific page that you're going to want to see because it's going to be very interesting when I run my actual integration level testing. But integration testing with Xcore is actually relatively straightforward as well. So in this case here, just for example purposes, all my stuff is within the same project. So in your mind, just think of it like this. Maybe I'm a different team that's consuming these components, and I'm going to run my integration test against it, and I'm going to be able to see a different results that come back from the integration scan. So talking through specifically, let me get to, I think it's shop that I want. Yes. This shop test. So I've opened a folder that's now integration. This integration folder contains all my integration specs. So this integration spec that I'm using is using Axe WebDriver.js. It's an Axe core integration for Selenium WebDriver JS. So all I have to do to bring in my project is create a console called Axe Builder, require Axe WebDriver JS. The rest of it, using Selenium and Selenium WebDriver with it, allows me to hook into previous test cases that I already had. So for instance, this test case here, before all these test cases run, I'm going to create a new driver. I use Chrome. It doesn't matter. You can use Firefox, IE, Edge, whatever you want to use with it. I say IE because somehow it's still alive. But anything with it, you can use whatever driver you want to. Okay. So I create a new driver, and I'm going to take the actual Axe driver object that I've created up top, and I'm going to create a new Axe builder, which I brought in, which is my required from Axe WebDriver JS. And what we do is we wrap the actual driver, the WebDriver instance, with Axe builder. And what that does is it allows us to inject Axe core into the page and scan it for accessibility violations, right? Super duper straightforward, but actually it's really cool how it goes into it. So in my test cases here, before all these, I'm going to go to the shop page. I run this locally using React scripts, fire it up, and then actually test against the pages. So these are my, again, every time I do this, I always say this, and I want to make sure this is clear. Adding this to your original test case that you have only makes this easier in getting accessibility into your testing process, right? So these pages that I'm testing is right now, this shop page. Here's my page load. Here's a test for my total listings. Here's checking out my listings button render, right? And all I'm doing is adding one more test case that says is accessible. Super duper straightforward and easy. So what I do is with that Axe driver object, I take a results object. So I say const results. I'm going to wait the Axe driver .analyze. And what this will do is scan the page for the 50% accessibility violations. And the same thing you saw before, consistency across the board, right? Results.violations.length, I would expect those to be 0, right? On the page itself. And again, if I take all the page level stuff out when I actually run the scan, there's still going to be accessibility violations that come up from an actual component level standpoint as well. So here, I'm going to also log the report violations again so we can see them in the log, okay? So I'm going to run test integration, let this run. This will fire up my application and then test against it. You can run this headless as well. I'm not running it headless just for demonstration purposes. So this will pop up and you'll be able to see the pages itself. Okay. So now I'm going to actually go back to Lightsaber Emporium and I'm going to go to the shopping page because visually it's easier to see it one time and have me describe it and then go back to the code and explain what's going on with it. So this component that I have is a listing component. The listing component contains a heading that says, for instance, it's different lightsabers. So I have a wind saber, assist saber, cross saber, and a double saber. I know I have more bad than good, whatever, red lightsabers are cool. So in this case here, I have a heading that says makes wind saber. I have some information underneath it. It says here's some data. The string says what details about this thing. And then I have an add cart and a more details button. All right. And this component is used 3 other times on the page. So 4 times I have 4 different options on the page, right? Now you think about this just logically right now. If I have this one component that I tested one time in one different scenario and scan with Axe core and say, yes, it's good to go. It's fixed up, right? What do you think is going to happen when I look at the results that come back from the scan? Am I going to find 0 or am I going to find more issues, right? The truth of the matter is you're going to end up finding more issues because, again, it goes back to testing and isolation can cause a lot of issues from that standpoint, right? So if I look at this on this page, okay, I'm going to go back to my Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go to the Ally reports. I'm going to go to the integrations folder this time, and we're going to go directly to the shop page. Okay. Now this is zoomed in a lot of bits, but I'm going to get to what I need to get to here. Let's go to, thank you. There we go. All right. The first one, HTML expected duplicate IDs. Oh, duplicate IDs. Cardinal sin number 1 when doing component testing is using IDs over and over and over again, the same piece. So if I go to an actual listing, so this is my listing object, and go inside here, you're going to notice I have the same IDs used over and over and over again. So for instance, this details button has the same ID, more deets, and then add to cart, right? Duplicate IDs over and over and over again. Successfully violation, right? You got to have multiple different IDs that tie to it. So duplicate IDs is one of the main ones that we see over and over again. If I, let me leave that open this time, go back to the shop page again, okay? There's actually some other ones that come up in here as well. So one of the ones I always suggest with Axe core for people to use, there's multiple levels in the objects that come back from it. One of the levels is violations. The other one is something that's called incomplete or needs review. Incomplete needs review is extremely helpful because what it can do is allow you to see more from a manual perspective, what's your issue may be or something you may need to test. So in this case, I always suggest using needs review, especially if you use output in console or make your own logger, right? So in this case here, this says this link. So it says HTML found with the ID of about needs to be reviewed. Links with the same name have similar purpose. Wait, what? There's no links with the same name that have similar purpose. What are you talking about? Oh, I have an about link in my top navigation, and I have an about link in the bottom, right? So I don't necessarily know, right? I don't really know necessarily on this thing right now is what, right? That's going about. So I can look at it and say, okay, do these go to the same spot? If they do, sure, fantastic. I'm good from that perspective. But if, right, if somebody looks along this says, okay, these go to different spots, they should probably have different text or something to help them along the way, right? Another one that came up in that list is also add to cart, right? Add to cart in this case, right? It's just going to look at the same thing over and over and over again, right? Do I have any context to what I'm adding to this cart? Am I adding a Mace Window Saver? Am I adding an Assist Saver? No, I don't know, right? So this is another one of those things you can't find when you do just one level of test, right? You have to have those multiple levels of test in order to get along with it and actually find these issues in there, okay? One more example of this is actually really good one to see is if I actually go to the cart page itself, okay? So in the cart page, I had a component. This is a real world example. I know a lot of people want to come to this and dog me on some of the stuff and say, yeah, well, this isn't necessarily real. No, this is an exact real world example of what actually happened. So I have a cart item component, okay? This cart item basically looks the exact same from this perspective, right? It's got some of the same content, right? So it's basically showing the thing I add to the cart. And I also have this data input, right? So with my data input component, I have a label and I have an input, right? And with that, on the input, I'm using ARIA labeled by the ID of that label. I bet most people that are listening right now can hear exactly what I'm going to say. When this actually gets rendered out to this page, guess what? I have a first name, last name, credit card number, CVV, 4 different inputs. Guess what their IDs all are? The exact same. So I have multiple different ARIA labels going through to it. Yes, for some people who know accessibility really well, that's elementary. This happens so often, and so many times we see this out in the field. So it's unbelievable what you can do at 2 levels of test to find certain errors like this before it even gets to customer facing, right? You can change your component to actually use a specific ID or a new ID, right? Give the developer the ability to set the IDs as a prop or something along those lines, or just use HTML for different IDs that come through, right? So again, that's one thing with it. There's actually is one more in here that is pretty cool along the way. This might, again, sound relatively like, yeah, Mark, that's pretty obvious. We should do that. When you test components with React, Angular, Vue, and even Ember, sometimes we test those and we don't actually fully render out the full content with CSS and colors. Again, does it make sense if you're using style components, things like that? Awesome. You can use style components and test with Xcore. That totally works. You're going to get your color contrast testing, but a lot of times color contrast testing and testing for specific color related issues actually doesn't happen at a component level. It happens at integration level. So if I'm writing CSS, that's not necessarily the best. It doesn't flow or fit when somebody actually changes a component. Or for instance, let's say I make this component that's to remove a cart. It's a button that's green. Let's say I give the developer the ability to change that color, right? Okay, how do I know that color is going to be compliant when it gets to a page, right? So there's multiple different things. One example on this page I was going to show you is when I actually tab to, there's a details and a buy again button when I have an item in my cart. This details and buy again button, what's actually inside of it is pretty interesting. There's no change of context to it. So from an accessibility standpoint, when I actually ran my scan, if I go to my logged output really quick, we go to, I need my cart page, thank you. Oops, there we go. All right, if I look at this here, let's see, needs to be reviewed, there we go. Nope, that's the same on top. Oh, I love when this thing puts these things out of order. Anywho, for time's sake, I'll just tell you what it is. So this right here, I don't have color contrast being tested on the actual link itself. So in this case here, there's nothing that differentiates the link from the background. It just looks like standardized text, right? Guess what? Along the way, you might not actually test this within a component. You can, again, style components, any kind of styling you can do with that to render it out, you can do that. But again, in this case here, I got this from integration level testing. I did not get this when I was doing component level testing. So we can kind of see the different angles that come from it. Yes, are there page level content that gets scanned in here? that you can look at and say, yes, should the document have an HTML lang, right, from the top? That's an actual document level integration test. Sure, those are things you can only pick up in integration testing. But from a component to integration, right, I test my components and I put the components on the page. You can see why in JavaScript frameworks it is specific to that, right? You have to be able to test at both levels. If not, you're going to miss content out the door. And if there's one thing, again, I sound like a broken record, but I want to say it again. Testing components in their own silos, right? So, or testing in general in their own silos. Components and integration, they have to coexist and work together, right? You have to be able to see how many issues exist when I put this to a full entire page. Yes, you can use something like Storybook along the way too, if you really wanted to. Some developers from React, Angular, Vue, they'll use Storybook to actually test their content page. That's fantastic. That's a different level of integration test, but it's not a full page test. So just know integration testing needs to work in hand, specifically with your component and functional testing in order to effectively test your content from an automated perspective. Okay. I know that was a mouthful because sometimes I like to talk really fast. So, all right. So that's kind of the high level, quick little overview into what we're looking at, why from a JavaScript framework perspective, it's different when we talk about testing our content, right? And testing our actual contents from component level to integration level. But I promised one more thing before we got done, and that's maintaining how to learn and how to actually maintain an accessible framework, right? So some strategies and guidance to try. When putting automation into place, there's a few strategies you can try. Start small, work big, right? Xcore allows you to actually prioritize certain things. So you can prioritize by impact, prioritize it by doing smaller components first, right? What are your most used components? Right? Can you actually do that? Can you actually test against that content first? Start small, work in chunks. Maybe you want to fix certain issues first. You can actually do an Xcore. You can set a custom rule and say, hey, I want to just test this and this. I don't want to test something like, or some people, when they get to it, they can't fix color contrast. They'll take color contrast out of the picture because it has to go back to design, right? There's a ton of customization. Create something that allows you to start small and work big, right? A level 0 strategy. I love talking about this one because I always strive to get teams to get to this point. So aim to have 0 accessibility violations or issues within your automated scans, right? Yes, this can take a while to get to that point. When you get to that point, strive to keep it there. Big time. I can't tell you how many teams I've seen successfully maintain an accessible application. Yes, there is the manual aspect of testing it. However, in this case here, right, if I keep it down at 0, I have a baseline accessible application, right? So keep it at 0 at all costs when you get to that level 0 strategy. Again, more of an advanced setup, but it allows you to actually keep the content in the base of your application or components accessible. Create a rule set for all to use. This sounds really overarching and kind of huge. Let's do, but going back to the start small or big, create something along the way that allows you to tag specifically what you want. So you could start with, hey, I just want to fix WCAG 2A issues. You can do that with Xcore, right? I only want to fix these 10 issues to start with, and then we'll chunk it into other ones. Okay, cool. You can do that, right? You can definitely create an actual rule set to fix along the way. Because like I said here, some issues take longer than others to fix. So create a rule set, test against, and allows you to fix them in a timely manner. The last one's a big one. Again, more of an advanced setup, but it is one to talk about. Is create a regression suite to check your actual keyboard functionality of your components. So an example I can give you, if I have custom radio buttons, and those radio buttons should behave in a certain way. I should be able to tab to it and go to the first item that was last selected. I should be able to arrow key up and down, right? You can actually automatically test for that. You don't necessarily have to just use keyboard to do that. I can test all that functionality in an actual unit test case itself, whether that's an integration test case or a component functional test case. You can do that 110%. A lot of teams I've seen start to do this have had great success in regression testing their old content because if new things go out the door, or else they change the actual component when it gets to the page, they can catch if keyboard functionality has been thrown off in a custom component. So creating a regression suite to test your keyboard stuff is awesome. It's more of an advanced setup, but it is something to think about going forward with it. For the last piece of this, if there's anything that we've talked about today that I want to make sure we drive home, it's never stop evolving and learning. The one thing that gets, that happens to most teams over and over again is you don't evolve your testing with your project, right? So going back to that first point, if I bring somebody new onto the team, right? I'm an advanced developer, right? Noah's brand new to my team. I bring them in, right? What ends up happening is a lot of people don't want to keep pushing on that accessibility knowledge, right? That Axe core knowledge, right? I should test my components for accessibility standpoint. What they do is they get stagnant, leave testing in the rearview mirror and just pass the test case and move on, right? Or they just say, there's some issues on it. It's fine. We don't really test it from that perspective. No. In order to maintain accessible application, you have to go above and beyond. There is no excuse for it, right? A lot of teams I work with will get whatever they're doing. They'll set up Axe Core or maybe Axe DevTools. They'll put it in there and they'll stop and just say, yeah, it works just fine. No, you have to have a standard in place when your content is created that includes accessibility tests. Anytime I make a change to a component or make a new component, I have to have an it is accessible test case, right? Or test for accessibility, whatever that is, right? Test the different functionality of those components, right? Initially, what teams do is they test their component as is, but if that component or that actual integration or action on the page changes, states, colors, actions, right? You have to test those different functionalities that exist as well. And a lot of times what ends up happening is those different states or colors or anything like that, they don't get tested. Update it, keep evolving what you've got there, right? Last but not least, goes back to my opening statement, learn to check the content using assistive technology and also learn to test with keyboard, right? Going above and beyond and learn to manually test your content is something that it took me a while, to be completely honest with you, to learn. I was a developer. I knew nothing about accessibility. And when I started to actually use something like Axe Core, test my content daily, learn from accessibility standpoint, and then also learn to use a screen reader and keyboard test my content, whole game changed. How much time you can save testing your own content is unreal. It's actually immeasurable, in my opinion, if you want to talk about it. The dollars and cents you can save by making your content accessible because you can fully test it from an automated standpoint and a manual standpoint will save you time and effort holistically across the board. So if we leave here with one thing, it's please do not stop evolving and learning, right? Have a standard in place, test different functionality, and learn to test with a keyboard and a screen reader with that. So with that, I will open it up for any questions as I completely chug this water that I got next to me.
Alrighty, thank you, Mark. You nailed the timing, just crushed it. Lots of great questions. Thanks everybody for the engagement. I've started a handful that I'm going to throw at you. Some of them I was able to answer in kind of in the course of the thing. I was able to grab that link. Somebody shared the link to your test code, and that I made sure to share that out to the people who asked. That's in chat as well, so people can look in the chat for that GitHub link, but that's there. So thanks, Mark, for that. I'm just going to start running these down. So from Anonymous, I've struggled to get automated Axe Core tests working for application states after initial load. For example, not getting reports after opening a modal. Is this not a supported feature, or are there any tricks that you can recommend for having Axe Core run automatically when new things appear in the DOM?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things you can do with that. So depending on how you have your setup with it, right? So if you are doing like integration level testing, right? And when I call that .analyze functionality, you can actually built into most of the Axe Core integrations that are out there is the ability to include a specific content. So let's say I scan the page initially, right? I do some action with WebDriver or with whatever testing library you're using, right? I do that action and I pop up the modal. What you can do is scope your scan specifically to the modal itself. That way you don't have everything in the background running and actually get the content scanned just for that actual component itself, right? If you're doing something like React testing library, we're trying to get a modal to pop up and all that. It's the same concept. You can scope axes, or you can scope anything you run with axe.run or analyze functionality to a specific component and get the results back from it as well. The other thing too, if you're looking for more like the whole page being scanned, so like a modal opens up and you want to know if the background content is accessible and things like that. Again, kind of goes back to that custom rule set piece. You can turn off certain rules, like, hey, when this opens, I know it's going to scan the rest of the content on the page, but I do want to know XYZ rules are running as well. So those are the things I would suggest for that. If I'm understanding the question correctly, those are the things that I would do to kind of help with that load time.
Awesome, thank you. Or if I'm doing my Mark Steadman cosplay, I would say dope.
Yeah, dope.
Dope. That was called out by not Denis Boudreau in chat. So thank you, not Denis Boudreau. Can you comment on any experiences you've had regarding using Cypress with Axe versus Selenium WebDriver?
Yeah. So Cypress in general, I mean, both of them extensively, they're using pretty much the same way. WebDriver JS, and this is just my opinion. I'm not saying if you want to use the Cypress integration, I've used it before. It is fantastic. WebDriver JS has more built-in functionality. Number one, it's actually supported by us at Deque as an open source, and Cypress is not. Cypress itself is actually used and created by a multitude of incredible people. I'm going to tell you that right now, but Deque itself is not involved with it. So the WebDriver JS has a lot more built-in functionality with it. However, the integration for Cypress is relatively straightforward and easy to use. I think it has a little bit of its own reporting that comes back from it, so you get that out of the box, versus like with WebDriver, you probably have to make your own login out from it as well, but Cypress just has that. In my opinion, it's either or. I just would let you know that one's supported by us and one's supported by open source community. One's got kind of out of the box reporting and one doesn't. That would be the big differences, I'd say.
Question, another anonymous question. Have you got any experience with WebDriver IO Selenium and automated tests with screen readers in CI/CD? If yes, is there a way to log reports as artifacts in a pipeline job?
Yeah, so WDIO, so WebDriver IO, sorry, didn't mean to use acronym for that. So WebDriver IO Selenium. Yeah, so what you can do along the way. So I do have experience using this. So our paid for tool actually has, which is Axe Dev Tools, actually has reporting that's built out of the box with it, which goes above and beyond Axe Core. But if you create objects from the Axe Core integration, so if you're using like WDIO, you use your own hook to create those log files, like I showed you in this presentation here. You can actually just point when you get done. I'm going to use Jenkins as an example because it's still the most widely used. When I get done running this in a CI/CD pipeline, right? Most CI/CDs are going to make you run it headless. When this gets running with WDIO, what I can do is point my actual pipeline job to those files I created, make them as artifacts, just say star anything as a log, and then I can get to those log files and see all the output from that along the way. The second question, as far as like screen reader tests, there's nothing that's automated from a screen reader standpoint. We don't have anything in here like automates, open up a screen reader or anything like that. This is all content we can get without a screen reader, right? For sure. Axe Core always strives to have 0 false positives. But again, there's no actual screen reader testing with it. That's where I talk about, that's that manual piece of it along the way. But WDIO and creating your own custom reports, all you have to do is run it, point your actual pipeline job or the job itself to those files, create them as an artifact, and then you can link them out there for everybody to see.
Somebody asks, what is the certificate on the wall behind you?
This one, that would be my Illinois State University, go Redbirds, Bachelor of Science degree on there. Yeah, so that's my degree. That's Kaminsky Park in a painting, for those of you who don't know.
Go Sox. Go White Sox.
Yeah, go Sox.
I want to ask you, can you add custom impact levels? For example, a priority level based on the number of populations impacted. With Axe Core, is there any customization to reporting from like an impact level standpoint? I know that out of the box, we already assign impact levels in terms of criticality, in terms of the impact to the user. Is that ever customizable?
As of right now, no. So the levels that we have there are going to be the same. So let me rephrase that. You can change the levels in there. So let's say I had like color contrast, I think is still under serious, depending on what it is. It can be under like serious to critical. I can change it to something that's accepted. So I think we have minor, moderate, serious, critical, blocker, I think. I have to check me on that one. But it has to be one of those right now in there. You can't change it to something that's actually customized to what you have. It has to be one of those subsets. But you can change it to any of those we have, but it is strictly tied to those specific impact levels right now.
Awesome. This is another good one that I've seen a couple of is, do you know, like, are there any direct comparisons that you would have between using Axe Core versus like Pally in this instance?
Oh, Pally. So I don't have, I'm going to be completely honest with you, I don't have a lot of experience with Pally or Pally. I can't remember how you pronounce it. So I'm probably not going to have a good answer for this question, but I don't necessarily have a lot of experience with it, so I couldn't give you a full comparison with that per se.
Okay, that's fair. Next question. You recommend asserting on the results type violation in your component tests. Do you have any recommendations on how to handle the results type incomplete?
Gotcha. Yeah. So I kind of showed this before, but one thing that I do suggest, if you do want incompletes to show up, it's actually relatively straightforward. So the actual logger that I created, what I ended up doing is I actually went through the results array itself and then went through the incomplete array. If I found anything incomplete, I just logged it out like it was violation. So one thing you can do, if you want to see the incomplete results, as simple as this, I've actually seen teams do this. If you want to see stuff that comes through as incomplete, which again, for everybody on this call, incomplete is not a false positive. It's something that Axe-Core would test and say, hey, we couldn't fully finish the test, so you need to go out and check it yourself. So like those multiple links with IDs on them, right? Where it was the about and the about. If those go to two different locations, accessibility violation. If you go to the same place, it's not, right? So we say, okay, cool, not an accessibility violation. But what you can do, what I've seen teams do is either log out the incompletes with the violations, which you can do, or you can console to the console itself the violations and the incompletes, so you can see, hey, these are the violations, and then here's the incompletes, right? There's multiple different ways. It's relatively straightforward. All you have to do is results.incomplete, and you get the results back for the incomplete ones. Results.violations get your violations. It's really, really straightforward. The object you get back, the actual JSON object itself, is really, really easy to use, to sort through. So it's really just the results.incomplete, results.violations, and you can do whatever you want to with the object then.
Last question we're gonna do here, and again, I want to thank everybody for their engagement with us today. This has been a really awesome session. Thanks to you, Mark. Last question: do you have any experience in building this type of automation around customer-generated content, supplying reporting to an end user instead of logging? Examples would be something like an e-commerce product or a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get type of environment, anything like that.
Yeah, so normally what I suggest for something, maybe it's like a content management system or WYSIWYG, right? You can use Axe as the extension itself. So just giving a really basic example, I showed the API integrations. There are ways to hook into them. It's a little difficult to do that. But what I suggest, so for instance, like AM, you're allowed to preview your page when it gets done. So if I'm a content creator, I create some new content, I go to my page preview. During that time, I could run the actual Axe extension. And then what I can do is get the results back from it. And then we're good to go, right? That's one way to do it. With that, it's not necessarily automated at that standpoint. It's a little bit difficult, but there are ways to use axe.run within the browser itself. Do that. It's just a little more complicated to get to that point. But normally a good starting point is using the Axe free extension. In for Firefox and Chrome, and scan the content that's in preview mode then. That would be the one thing I would suggest.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you. Well, we are at time. Thank you very much to everybody involved. Thank you to Mark, and hope you guys enjoy the rest of AxeCon.
Thanks, everybody.